I had gut feelings that things weren't right when he showed up, and the daughter then left and wasn't here for several months. It concerned me quite a bit, actually.
Ocala police say 38-year-old Ralph Bacon shot and killed his estranged wife, 34-year-old Nancy Bacon, and Nancy's 4-year-old daughter, Eden.
On the evening of February 10th, 2026, officers were dispatched to a condominium unit in Ocala. The call was brief. Gunshots reported. Possible domestic disturbance. Nothing about the dispatch suggested that the scene would become a double homicide investigation involving a mother and a 4-year-old child. When officers arrived at the Marion Springs Condominiums, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged doors, which meant one critical thing. Whoever had entered that home had been allowed inside. Inside the residence, investigators located 2 victims, Nancy Bacon, 34 years old, and her daughter, Eden, just 4 years old. Both had been shot. The scene showed no indication of struggle beyond the violence itself. There were no signs of ransacking, no theft, no attempt to conceal what had happened. This was not a burglary. It was targeted. In cases like this, investigators do not begin by asking what happened. They begin by asking who had access, who had motive, who had emotional proximity. Because statistically, violence inside a residence is rarely random. The relationship between Nancy and her estranged husband had not been linear. Records indicated the couple had previously divorced years earlier. Yet, like many fractured relationships, separation had not meant permanence. They reconnected, attempted reconciliation, and in late 2025, he had reportedly moved back into the residence. To outsiders, this might have appeared like an attempt at rebuilding a family structure, but investigators often look for a different signal. Reunification after instability can introduce stressors rather than resolve them, especially when unresolved grievances remain beneath the surface. According to early investigative findings, there had been an ongoing source of conflict inside the home. The issue centered on paternity. Eden was not his biological child. To many, this might appear to be a private matter, but in behavioral investigations, perceived betrayal, whether real or imagined, can become a destabilizing psychological factor. This does not create violence on its own, but when layered with control issues, jealousy, and relationship volatility, it can contribute to what criminologists call a personal grievance narrative, a mindset where the offender reframes reality as injustice directed at them. Investigators believe the suspect entered the apartment without resistance. There was no evidence Nancy anticipated danger, no emergency calls made beforehand, no defensive preparations, which suggests the encounter began as something ordinary, a conversation, an argument, or an attempt at resolution. Domestic homicides often do not escalate over hours. They escalate over minutes. A single emotional trigger can collapse restraint. When that moment occurs, the violence is immediate and irreversible. Witnesses later reported seeing a vehicle leaving the complex shortly after the gunfire. Law enforcement quickly identified the driver. A regional alert was issued. This was no longer only a homicide investigation. It was now a manhunt. The suspect had not attempted to hide, had not attempted to stage the scene. Instead, he fled, suggesting awareness of what had already been set in motion. In many domestic homicide cases, offenders do not attempt long-term evasion. They act, flee briefly, and then reach what investigators call a terminal decision point. Authorities track the vehicle traveling north, crossing state lines, maintaining movement but not attempting complex escape tactics. This was not the behavior of someone trying to disappear indefinitely. It resembled something else: disengagement. When officers located the vehicle and initiated a stop, the encounter lasted only moments. Before officers could intervene, the suspect fatally shot himself inside the car. The case ended there. No arrest, no interrogation, no courtroom testimony, only reconstruction. Without a surviving offender, investigators rely entirely on behavioral evidence, statements from acquaintances, relationship history, prior incidents, patterns of conflict. This process is less about proving guilt and more about understanding causation. Domestic homicide. Suicide cases frequently follow a recognizable arc: a relationship marked by instability, a perceived personal humiliation or loss of control, a triggering confrontation, an act of violence directed inward toward the family unit, followed by self-destruction. This pattern is tragically consistent across jurisdictions. To communities, these events feel abrupt. Neighbors often report hearing nothing unusual beforehand. Friends describe the individuals as trying to work things out, but escalation is rarely visible from outside the relationship because the critical shift happens internally. In forensic psychology, this is sometimes described as cognitive narrowing. The offender begins to interpret all events through a single emotional lens. Resentment becomes certainty, conflict becomes persecution, and resolution begins to feel impossible. Once that narrowing completes, the capacity for restraint can disappear rapidly. What remains after cases like this is not just an investigation file. It is absence, a home that will not be reoccupied, a child's belongings that will not be reclaimed, families left to reconstruct meaning from something that offers none. Law enforcement closes the case administratively once evidence confirms the sequence of events. But psychologically, these cases are never truly closed because they raise questions that cannot be answered through prosecution. What intervention could have altered the trajectory? At what moment did reconciliation become risk? And how often do warning signs appear only in hindsight? True crime analysis is not about dramatizing violence. It is about examining the mechanisms that produce it. Cases like this remind investigators that domestic environments can become the most dangerous settings when emotional conflict, identity, and control intersect. There was no elaborate criminal plan, no attempt at concealment, only a breakdown that ended in irreversible decisions. When officers first arrived that night, they encountered what appeared to be a contained incident inside a single apartment. But events like this extend far beyond one location. They ripple through families, communities, and investigative systems tasked with understanding why they occur. And unlike many criminal cases, this one offers no testimony, no explanation from the person responsible, only evidence, and the responsibility to study it carefully. This channel examines real cases through documented evidence and behavioral analysis. If you are interested in more methodical breakdowns of criminal events, you may consider following future releases.